Let me start with a question, and I really do want you to actually answer it in your head before we keep going. You ready? Here's the question. Who owns your Sunday? Who owns your Sunday? You have your answer? Now, I know the reflex answer. You have a worship leader, you have a production person, you have somebody over kids, somebody over hospitality, and somebody is preaching the message, right? Every department is covered. So you intuitively just want to say, well, we've got Sunday handled. Lots of people own Sunday. But that's not the question I asked. I didn't ask who owns all the parts. I asked who owns the whole. Who is looking at the morning not from 10 feet, but from 10,000 feet? And for most churches, when you really push on it, the honest answer is nobody. So today, I want to walk you through why that gap exists, what it may be quietly costing you in your church, and the one move that you can make to start closing it. And I'm also going to give you something that I did not put on the blog today, which is actually how you can introduce some of these concepts to your team without it turning into a turf war, right? Because that's the part I think that can scare a lot of leaders off. So let's begin first, though, with the actual problem. And you understand this. Sunday is the most complex thing your church produces. Think about just for a sec, right? Uh, all the moving parts, almost everything that's happening on a Sunday. You have more things happening on a Sunday morning than any other event probably on your calendar. You have music and a message and production and kids and parking and hospitality and tech and lighting and transitions and the walk from the car to the front door to the seat and back again. I mean, you build the whole thing every 7 days. And every one of those pieces is sending a signal to the people in your room. Everything communicates. And whether you've designed that signal or not, it's saying something. Now, here's the thing, right? If you examine your org chart, here's what you'll find. You'll find probably a clear owner for nearly or every one of those things, all of those departments, maybe you call it. And that feels to you, at least, like good leadership. It feels organized, and it is organized. But here's what I want you to see. If everybody owns a lane and nobody owns the road, are we positioned to be as great as we can? Right? The departments are covered. The overall experience, though, is not. And the experience does not actually live inside of the individual departments. Do you know where the experience lives? It lives in between them. It lives in the handoffs. It lives in the transition from worship to announcements to the inspiration spot to the message to the dismissal. It lives in that moment that the guest moves from the parking lot to the front door through the lobby. The tone shift between the check-in line and the auditorium. Those handoffs typically belong to no one. And anything that belongs to no one is going to drift. When no one owns the whole, right? The whole defaults to whoever just pushes the hardest, whoever had the last meeting, whoever was the loudest this week. So the worship leader wins when, he's really fighting for something this week. The production person, wins next week. Your kids director, flags a check-in problem and calls it a bottleneck. So that person wins the next week. And so your schedule and your planning, everything starts to shift around the loudest department or the biggest problem each week. And this is really matters. None of those things are wrong or should be ignored necessarily. Every single one of them is doing exactly what you have asked them to do. They are optimizing the piece that you have handed them to lead. However, a service that is built from a bunch of kind of competing optimizations, you know what it does? It just ends up as a collision. So let me kind of give you a self-diagnostic to use here, right? Something that you could even do this today or this week. There are 3 symptoms that you can kind of ascertain, evaluate that will tell you if you have a Sunday ownership gap. You ready? 3 symptoms. Here's the first symptom. Your service runs long and nobody can quite explain where the time went. That's a sign that no one is holding the whole clock. Symptom 2. After a service, you sometimes feel like something didn't connect. And when you try to point at the broken part, you can't really find it. And that's because there was no broken part. What you felt was a seam between the parts coming apart. And you know what? Seams, they are very invisible on an org chart. Third symptom, last one. And this one may be the clearest. When you ask your team, who decides the flow of the morning, you get more than one name, or everybody just pauses and looks around. If either of those are the answer, that's a big red flag, right? Listen, if any of that lands, let me give you a fix. And it's actually simpler than you think, no matter how big your church, okay? Though it does require some decisions that a lot of churches kind of don't like to make, especially and announce. Put one person, and here's the solution, put one person over the entire Sunday experience. That's it. Now, hear me clearly, right? Because I think this is where a lot of people get nervous. Your worship leader, by the way, right? This is important. Your worship leader still is going to own and lead worship. Your kids director still runs the kids programming. You're not taking anything away from anyone. But what you are doing is adding a role on top that owns the integration of all the other lanes. Someone who can own the flow, who can look at the seams, the transitions, the tone, the way every element either serves the morning or is serving against it. Like this person sits above the lanes and gets to just watch the entire road. Now, here's the non-negotiable part. You have to give this person real authority. If your Sunday owner can be overruled by any department head in the building, then you've just created a title. It's a figurehead. There's no real function in that. So the owner needs to have a final call on flow, on timing, on order. Otherwise, you're just right back to the collision, and you just have an extra meeting to deal with in between. Now, I mentioned that there's a new piece that I was going to give you today that's not on the blog. So here it is. You may be thinking, okay, Gavin, that sounds great, but if I hand, one person authority over the flow and the timing, my department leaders are going to feel like I just demoted them, or at least it's going to feel like an emotional demotion to them. So let me kind of introduce how you can potentially introduce this without creating a turf war. Right? So you do not frame this as authority. You frame it as protection. You sit with your team, all the department directors who were involved on Sunday, you sit down with all of them, and you maybe just say something just like this. Every one of you is so great at your piece, your lane. My job is to make sure that your great work does not get undercut by bad handoffs that no one currently owns. So I am asking, fill in the blank, this person, to protect the seams between us all. So the band's momentum doesn't die in a transition. So the work that you poured into all week with the kids can land correctly. And when you frame the owner as the person who's protecting all the other hard work that everyone else has done, in most cases, the resistance actually kind of drops. And you're not manipulating or lying. That's exactly what this person is going to do. Nobody is losing a kingdom, lower K kingdom. Everybody is actually gaining a guard that can mind the gaps. Now, some of you, and I get this, you're also listening and you're thinking, I don't even have another staff member, right? I don't have staff for dedicated ownership. Maybe you're bivocational. You've got a volunteer run weekend. Totally get it. You got 3 people wearing 13 hats. Listen, I hear you. And by the way, I understand it. I've been there before, and I work with lots of churches who don't have staff, running around, by the dozen. So if you cannot name a person, there is a solution, right? If a group has to function as one, it can happen. However, it is harder. It is doable though, but it's harder. And it does require 2 things that a lot of teams skip. 2 things. So if you're in a situation where you can't name one owner, you have to do these 2 things. First, one final decision maker inside the group has to be identified. You may have group ownership, but somebody, and it may be you, inside the group has to have final say. So shared ownership still needs a tiebreaker for the moment where people can't agree or don't see it the same way. So name that person now before the disagreement, not in the heat of it. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, defined rhythms matter because the group cannot hold something that is complex together, like through a group text, for instance. So Like you've got to have rhythms for meeting and talking and working together. I would suggest three rhythms: a weekly rhythm. So before the weekend, your team walks the entire service, start to finish, parking lot to parking lot, every element, every transition, every handoff, in order. And you are kind of at least walking through the entire morning. And you're not just walking through a spreadsheet of it. You're not just mailing this out. It's a face-to-face every week walkthrough. And if you're a volunteer-run organization, it may be an hour before the service starts. That's okay. But have all the people in the room who own a part of Sunday in the room together looking at each other. Okay, monthly, second rhythm, monthly is wonderful to have a step back moment and look at the next, 4-ish weeks out. Help everybody understand series direction, repeated patterns, where energy maybe is landing and where it may be not landing, right? You're really checking on whether the weeks that you have been working on have been working and where you're going together is heading in the right direction, the right way, at the right pace. So a monthly meeting where you lock things in for the next 4 weeks. And then the last rhythm is a quarterly one, a quarterly opportunity for you to kind of pull way out. Like now we're talking 30,000 feet, right? With the people who are going to be leading these different lanes on the road. And in this, meeting, this is where kind of the big problem solving stuff starts happening. Walk the parking lot together, pretend to be a first time guest one Sunday and use the quarterly meeting to walk through what it felt like to be a guest. Sit in the back row one Sunday, use the quarterly meeting to talk through what it feels like or what the experience was like. So what you're really doing in the quarterly meeting is noticing the seams that were just too easy to stop when you're just doing tactical stuff like weekly. So weekly protects Sunday, monthly protects the arc that you're creating on Sundays, and then the quarterly pullback protects you from that slow drift that you may just not be noticing. So what's your action item this week? Well, I guess it depends exactly on where you are, but I would love for it to be concrete. So maybe before your next staff meeting or before your next volunteer gathering, with your core team or elder board meeting, maybe you just answer one question out loud. Who owns the whole of Sunday? Just answer it. And if you can't name a person, maybe you find that person, have a conversation with them this week, start thinking about what it would look like to truly delegate, right? This role to them. And if you can't name anybody, or if there isn't an opportunity to name somebody, think about how you can allow the team to better function as one using those rhythms that we talked about earlier. So, a Sunday with no owner, you know what it does, right? It doesn't really blow up in the way that you're going to notice. It just drifts kind of quietly, and the experience kind of starts serving your departments instead of the people. And the loudest leader just sets the tone for everything. So the seams, these transitions, all the things that are happening in between the roads, in between the departments, they just get a little wider every month. And your department leaders continue to focus on what they have been given ownership over, but they're not thinking about the greater good, the greater whole. And then that guest who shows up isn't going to be able to pinpoint why they felt what they felt, but they're probably also not going to come back, and they're not going to have a chance to tell you. So you will keep doing a lot on Sunday either way, right? The lanes are going to stay full, but the lanes on a road that nobody is watching still do not move your people anywhere. So decide who owns it, an individual, or if it's a group, build those rhythms in and let them happen. And I guarantee you, your Sundays are going to get better.